Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are, of course, your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. We're back. They're becoming daily at the moment, not by choice, I can tell you, but we've got wonderful, amazing guests that are going to be filtering their way through, of course, these wonderful editions of Last Word on Spurs, and a man that we love having back on this show. Before I bring back our very special guest, I've got a man alongside me that's been one of my best co-hosts ever in the last 7-8 years. I've got the wonderful Jamie Brown over at the Daily Hotspur. Jay, love to see you back alongside me. Here we go again.
Yeah, obviously, it's been a quiet start to the window, hasn't it? But obviously, just as we're about to go on air, Spurs decide to spring into action. So no, obviously, plenty to talk about. Obviously, plenty to kind of review as well, and we've got an amazing guest to deal with. So yeah, really excited for this show.
We have indeed. It's funny, isn't it? Because we spend so much time talking about Spurs being MIA, missing in action. Suddenly they come into action just as we try and get ready for a show. Can't make it up. Listen, we're delighted to have this man back alongside Last Word on Spurs, where many know his dulcet tones. They see him, they watch him, they listen to him. We've had the pleasure of having him on the show for the last 4, 5, 6 years, where we've thrown together with Maka, with Jamie. Honestly, whenever this man graces our screens, it's always a pleasure. We're delighted to have back on Last Word on Spurs. He can only be known as one of the finest journalists ever around. The wonderful Darren Lewis returns. Dal, thank you for your time. You're even wearing white for the occasion. How are you?
I was actually looking at my cushions, actually. I was thinking, all my mates who I keep saying, I'm actually not a Spurs fan, I promise you. I'm very neutral.
Why are you denying it so much? You can now say you are. We won a trophy. Don't deny it as much.
I have to be objective, but I've known you for years. You guys know. I've got a little bit of a leaning.
I know. You've always got a soft spot for us, and you've always tried to be as kind as possible. And look, that's why we love having you back on the show. I think the one thing you do always bring, Dale, is a balance that sometimes, even as fans of the club, I can honestly say that with the emotion around Tottenham, and certainly over the last 18 months, that emotion really does suck you in. And sometimes it is lovely to get an outside perspective of someone that is so highly qualified, that has been around football for a long time. I mean, God, I don't know age you, Dale. How many years would you say you've been around the Tottenham beat? You've been around them for so many years.
My word. I would say I am pre-Jacques Santini. So what's that? 04. Gosh. I would say Santini, really, and then Martin Yole.
Yeah.
And then obviously from that, just Harry Redknapp, Wandy Ramos, and all of those. So in terms of covering Spurs, for the Daily Mirror, I think around about 20 years, just over 20 years.
Incredible. It's incredible. And when you gauge the fact, just to bear in mind, just a little bit before Dale's Tommy won't mind me saying, it has been 14 managers in the last 24 years. So Tottenham have got this, we know Daniel Levy's got this itchy thing of always hitting the reset button. In the last couple, every 2 years into all of our most recent projects, and here we are, as we bring Dale back on, we've got another manager. So it's when does it ever change? Talk about another. It looks like Tottenham have got another signing in what I know I'm terming it as Tottenham's second signing of the summer. Whether Jamie Brown terms it second signing of the summer, we'll see. So we'll bring that news to you right now that Tottenham, we understand, have agreed a $5 million deal, and that is for the 20-year-old Japan international centre-back Kota Takai from Kawasaki Frontale. Friend of the show, Ali Gold, put out a recent statement. Now, just to say on this point, I think this is up in the air at the moment, but we are hearing reports Takai will sign a 5-year contract with Tottenham. That deal should include an option for a further year. The young defender is expected to be part of Thomas Frank's first team squad for the coming season and will leave Kawasaki midway through their J-League 1 campaign to join up with the Danes' pre-season preparations, which are due to begin in just over a fortnight from now. Takai will turn 21 in September and has played 19 times this season in the Japanese League and another 9 in the AFC Champions League, scoring twice. Despite his age, the young defender has also captained the side once in their 3-3 draw at the home game against Yokohama in April. Ali has reported the centre-back was identified by Spurs technical director Johan Langer and his staff as being able to step into the Premier League following the footsteps of other young signings at the club in recent years, such as Lucas Bergvall, Pat Matassar, Destiny Udogie, with a signing given the green light by new Spurs head coach Thomas Frank. The expectation is the defender, who has now made 4 senior international appearances for Japan, will remain with the squad rather than be loaned out, but he will be fully assessed by Thomas Frank and his coaching staff up close and personal in training when he arrives at the club. However, with his experience with 78 senior club matches at his age and 4 international ones, is seen as similar and advanced on the international stage to the likes of Bergvall, Sarr, Udogie and Archie Gray, as being able to make the step up to the Premier League. He will become Thomas Frank's second signing of the summer after the club did confirm the deal for Matisse Tell. We understand that Takai had offers from both Germany and Italy, but reportedly wanted to join Tottenham. Before we get Dow's opinion on that, let's come over to you, Jay, on this breaking news that is approaching us here, that Tottenham have their second signing of the summer.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think you've got to trust the club on this one. Obviously, Langer's got a great track record for bringing in these younger players. Obviously, the biggest one was Lucas Bergvall last year. But look, he's obviously a player that seems very highly rated in the Japanese league. I know that a number of clubs were looking at him as well, like the likes of Barcelona, Bayern Munich. So he is someone who was very highly rated. I'm not going to say I'm an expert on him. He's someone that I've not heard a great deal about. But from people speaking to people just briefly, he seems like someone who is very highly rated over there. So look, obviously, an interesting addition. Obviously, it's interesting to see that he's going to come in and be part of that first team squad. But look, I mean, I know the comments we said as well that we need experience. Obviously, it's great getting in all these younger players, and obviously, as I said, we've had a great track record of doing that. And Bergvall, obviously, a lot of people wrote him off at the early stage of last season. Turned out to be our player of the season. So. Yeah, so it's an interesting deal. It's £5 million. That's not a lot of money for a club like Spurs. So, as I said, we've got a good track record. So, look, it's one that I totally trust the club with.
Dal, I'll bring you in. Spurs fans, a lot of Spurs fans are crying out for all the big names. Although at the same time, there's been a lot of praise in the past for the likes of Brighton and Brentford's data-driven models. How do you classify the signing of this defender for a nominal fee that, as we're hearing reports, will be actually expected to come into the first team, or certainly be part of the first team squad?
Actually, I'm quite enthused by this signing for a number of reasons. One of the key, anyone who supports Spurs or seen Spurs last season will know that they are weakest in defence. And if you get a couple of injuries, you're all over the place. So you obviously went through that period where you had no defenders. And if you look at what your mates down the road have done at the Emirates, they've built from the back, which is why they had the best defence in the Premier League last season. And some players that have gone on to do so superbly well in the Premier League, lots of people have never heard of them. Personally, my pet hate is when the same old names get recycled in the Premier League, and you've got all these clubs with so much money who won't actually go out and do a bit of scouting. And here we've got an example of a club that's gone out and done a bit of scouting, and I think it's terrific. Part of me wonders whether he was, I know he's being credited to Johan Lang, but I wonder if he was identified by your former manager Postecoglou, because he knows that market. And actually, I did wonder whether or not he would go into that market, not for him actually, but for Daisen Maeda, the 26-year-old wide forward at Celtic, who scored 26 goals last season from out wide, and who I'd be surprised if a club in the Premier League didn't take a chance on this summer, because he's got stamina for days. He was terrific in the Champions League, and I thought that he'd be a really good fit for you guys. And I almost still do if you don't maybe get an MBEUMO. I know that some people, particularly people on here, might say, well, that would represent a bit of a gamble, and I'd probably accept that. But we've seen a lot of players come from Scottish football down to English football and do superbly well. But in terms of Takai, he's a young player, high ceiling, big contract. He's good in the air. He's got a couple of caps already for his country. And you need that depth. I look at now your pool of centre halves, and you've obviously got Van der Ven and Romero, but behind them you've got Danso, and you've got now Takai, who's come in, and you've got a manager in Frank. Remember last season, people talk about the great job he did. Last season, one of his defenders was sold for £45 million. So people forget that. To a certain, I'm kind of loath to say it because I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here. On the one hand, you do, given that you've got these aspirations to punch your way at the top of the league, you do need to bring in top quality. But I also think there is a place for being able to go out there and get good, young, unexposed talent out there. And the Asian market, where there are lots of really good players that you can pick up cheaply, is a place where I expect more clubs to be going and shopping around in.
I remember you actually saying, Dal, the last time you was on when Andrew was in charge, that you were surprised the club hadn't explored the likes of the J League. And it's ironic, isn't it, that his departure comes along and then suddenly Spurs delve into the market and go and bring somebody from that respective league. It's a fascinating one. I just wonder, Jay, on this point, I know a lot of the fan base right now are screaming out, for the likes of an EZE, an MBEUMO, a Semenyo. Do you have any issue, Jay, with the fact that, as Dow has said there, they're maybe looking at building from the back and it's maybe exploring some players that are going to help the club?
Yeah.
Arguably from a data-driven model, because, these are the kind of players that arguably, as we've seen in the past with Brighton and Brentford go and sign these players and end up being world beaters. You have the same fans saying, well, why didn't Tottenham go and sign these players? So, can you really win with this kind of signing, Jay?
But that's the thing. You look at some of the players that we've missed out over the years. Obviously, Jack Grealish was one that we were refused to pay. What was it, £25 million for? That looks ridiculous now. We've wanted Eze for since his QPR days as well. So Jared Bowen, I know, was another one at Hull City. So look, it's you don't really want to be paying £65 million for a player that you could have had 2 or 3 years ago for well below that fee. So look, it's something that's worked very successfully for Spurs in the past, where we've most of our best players have come from cheaper fees or players that maybe we've not exactly heard of before. So can
I just add to what you're saying? In terms of fees, people talk about cheap fees, right? And also unknown players. Nobody heard of Jakob Kivior when Arsenal signed him. And now he slots into that defence when they have injuries. He can play 2 positions as well, left back and centre half. And there are other examples of players that have come into the league. People haven't heard too much about them. I bet you, for example, and clearly he's a bit more expensive, but if you look at Vitor Heis, the centre half that Manchester City have bought, second half of last season, he wasn't very good. He was still adapting to the league. I bet you any money he's a terrific player next season, now that he's had a few months to get his feet under the table. And I think this isn't, yes, he's young and untried, but I think in defence it's different. You can't mess about with defence. You've got to get the right players in for the right. I've got a few thoughts about Dragusin, who I don't rate at all.
Interesting.
And Romero, I'll keep them for when you get to that bit, but I like the look of this boy.
Okay, well, listen, we shall see. Like I say, as things stand at the moment, he will become formally Tottenham's second signing of the summer. When he does sign that dotted line at the moment, there's still some understanding as to how long that contract length will be. There's reports it will be a 5-year contract with an option of a further year. But of course, we shall update you in due course as and when he does become formally a Tottenham player. But it has had the here we go behind it. Just to give you an update and also some other news we've heard throughout the last 24 hours, and we'll, of course, filter into the show with wonderful, of course, Darren Lewis joining us. We've heard reports that Scott Munn has now been placed on gardening leave by Tottenham. That won't surprise many because, as we know, there's been a number of backroom changes from Tottenham, or should I say boardroom changes, over this last week. But it does appear that Scott Munn's time at the club is now coming to an end. We'll be discussing with Dow as to where Tottenham are in this reported battle fight, if you want to call it that, for Brian MBEUMO. We're hearing this constant change in the wind with regards to suggestions of a second bid going in for Manchester United, where a Tottenham in that battle as well. We do know that this name has been on Spurs' radar for God knows how many years. Jamie's already touched upon him. Eberechi Eze, we're hearing that there's major interest in Tottenham once again, considering a move for Eze. We'll discuss how that might look like, because again, there's been some reports over the weekend that there may be a way around having to pay such a huge amount up front in terms of that release clause and the complex conditions that come in activating that and paying that. So we're asking Dow about that on this show. But it's fair to say, Dow, a lot has happened, as it always does in the period of your absence on this show. And Spurs have gone through yet another manager. So on that basis, I'll steer over to Jamie, who is always my man in a crisis to help me out, to steer us to try and start officially this edition of Last One Spurs. Jay, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I remember Darren. We were, I think the last time you were on, I think it was during the semi-final of the FA League Cup against Liverpool. So yeah, obviously a lot's gone on since then. Spurs managed to end at 17-year wait for a trophy, 41 years without a European Cup. But of course, we obviously know about the Premier League form as well. It was 22 defeats in total. So it's kind of been the most crazy season where, you know, we've obviously achieved this amazing trophy, but also we've obviously had a disastrous Premier League season. And that's why I'm sure as we get into it, it's going to be a real split in the fan base about the sacking of Ange Postecoglou. But Darren, obviously we just get interested and really get your take on the decision to sack Ange, and whether you think it was the right one.
Well, look, the first place to start is I really do rate Thomas Frank. He's a good manager, superb communicator. He's a fantastic tactician, and he's a great manager as well. So I think you've got a great signing in Thomas Frank. I was on TalkSport the other day, and from nowhere they played me a little bit of audio where I had said, in your first season, if it's anything like I expect, Thomas Frank will probably be in there by next season. And I didn't even realize I'd said that, but that's what's ended up happening. But I like him. What I would say is that I would not have sacked Postecoglou. When you win silverware and you achieve Champions League football, which is what the brief is at Spurs, to get into the Champions League football, even though you don't have the wage bill for it, even though you don't have the depth of squad for it, that's the brief for any manager that takes over at Spurs. And as we know, I know firsthand from talking to Pochettino when he was at the club, eventually he said, I can't keep performing miracles at this club, because they do bring in the odd big name player, but very often it's the odd big name player rather than the consistency of players that, for example, mean that Arsenal are one player away from having a really good side, or Liverpool are one player away, 2 players away from having a really good side. And so I would not have sacked Postecoglou. And other people would say, well, tactically he wasn't this and tactically he wasn't that. But it's won your first trophy in 17 years, your first European trophy in 41 years. He's a good manager. And the club say that he went because the league position is the important thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Whereas I know a lot of the people on this broadcast now would take back Pochettino in a heartbeat. And when you got to the Champions League final, the league form went off a cliff. It was just horrendous. Now, and Pochettino, outstanding manager, of course, and I think he's a coup for any club that wants to sign him. But the fact is that whole 22 games lost statistic that everyone bandies around, it's skewed, because obviously once you knew you were going to put all your eggs in that particular European final basket, then that was all that mattered. I take the Erik ten Hag point that he won the FA Cup. They invested in a lot of players for him, and then next season he started really badly. But I think if you invest in players, you invest for the club, not necessarily the manager. especially in this particular era where at clubs decision making is collaborative. I know that people think about the old model where you go in and you say, I want him. It doesn't work too often that way anymore. You've got chief scouts, you've got heads of recruitment, you've got this, you've got that, and then the options are presented to the manager, but they've got to fit in with what the club wants. And if you look at, for example, Villa with Unai Emery, comes in, gets it up, they're in the relegation places, just out of it on goal difference. He takes them up and he gets into Europe that same season. Or Arne Slot comes in, takes over Jurgen Klopp's players and basically wins the league, because the players are bought for the club, not necessarily for the manager. And they're really good examples of what I'm talking about. So I would have given Postecoglou maybe the first 10 games of next season to see where you go. But for me, if you do what he's done, you build, you don't rip it up and start all over again. And that looks like what is happening now at your place.
Can I ask you, Dal, before Jamie maybe comes back in with a counter question as well? Like we discussed at the opening of the show, you've seen many different managers in the dugout at Tottenham. Probably more than you could even count yourself. How will you remember Ange just in terms of those press conferences? Because it's fair to say, I remember one or two exchanged voice notes that we had during his time at Tottenham. And look, I think we've had the likes of Ali on this show, as you know. A lot of the journalists that cover the Spurs beat, many would say he was fascinating to listen to in some press conferences. I think it's fair to say that he was prickly at times. What would be your takeaways from Ange's tenure at Tottenham in terms of sitting in a lot of those presses?
Well, the first thing I tell you from sitting in those presses is that a lot of those guys in there are painted as being guys who were on his back, on his case, and they weren't. They were very, very supportive of Postecoglou. I know them well. I know how they operate. And sometimes when people see things, get snippets of what goes in those press conferences, they take the view that those guys have had the knives out for him, and that is not true. I know them personally, so I can speak with a lot of authority on that. The second thing is, on the one hand, if I was a mate of Postecoglou, I'd text him or I'd put an arm around his shoulder, have a lemonade, and say, look, don't worry about it. Don't get too hung up on it. You've got nothing to prove. But I think Postecoglou was driven by the fact that if you look at his career, everywhere he's gone, he's been doubted. Even when he was in Australia, there's that famous footage on YouTube where he has a row with a pundit.
Craig Foster, yeah. Yep.
Craig Foster. And he stands up for himself. And that's what he's about, standing up for himself. And he doesn't care about how that looks in the media, because if he doesn't stick up for himself, then who does? And to be honest with you, in this particular era, I'm very much of the opinion, I've got no problem with it whatsoever. If you have opinions about other people, don't be upset if other people have opinions on you. So I've got no problem with him sticking up for himself. He was a good manager. He'll go on and find another club, I think, and he'll go on to win things as well.
Love that. Jay, if you don't mind me handing your hospital ball, I don't think it's a hospital ball, I'll let you take us over to the new era of Thomas Frank, which I know many want us to focus on and be the present.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as we've mentioned, Thomas Frank was the man to come in. We've said that the club made us wait for it in terms of his first interview, but he came in. It's really interesting to hear kind of him talk about a lot of the Spurs players. I think that's something that we, that Spurs fans are hoping that he'll come in and really work with some of these players. Obviously, some of the younger players as well, the likes of Matis Tel, who he spoke very highly of, but also the more experienced players like Dominic Solanke. As you can see here, he also mentioned about, going from being a team that has won something to now becoming serial winners. So I don't know, Darren, do you kind of think they'll be able to back up those words? Obviously, someone who hasn't previously won a trophy in his career, but do you think he's someone that, or he's the right man to make Spurs serial winners? I don't think there is.
How many times I've been asked this question with Spurs managers over the last 20 years?
I think we've asked you that most on this bloody show since the Jose and the Pochettino days.
The interesting thing about Frank is that he is a good manager. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. I was fascinated by what was said in the Spurs statement about we sacked the manager because even though we've won a first trophy in 17 years and the first European trophy in 41 years, league position is more important. So I ask you, as Spurs fans, if you finish 6th this next season with no trophy, will you have had a better season than the one you've just finished up with?
No, I mean, look. Well, I think it's always been the debate at Spurs. Would you take finishing lower down the table for a trophy? And I think a lot of us have always said yes. And now that I've tasted that, I want it again. For me,
Yeah,
if we
but
were to finish 6th,
17th, would you do 17th again, though, Jay?
It's tricky. Well, it depends what you're offering me. If you're offering me maybe a Super Cup or a Champions League, then maybe I would take it. But
yeah,
I guess I think that people want a bit of maybe some stability as well, because I think you're right. I do back that point, what you mentioned earlier, Darren, about, he's obviously put his eggs all in one basket. And obviously the injury situation as well made it very tricky to obviously go as well in the league and fight on multiple fronts. But yeah, I think fans kind of want that stability, want to be able to try and juggle different competitions, and to be able to have to sacrifice one to win the Europa League. It's tricky next year as well, because the Europa League was a major trophy. I don't know whether fans would be willing to do that for a League Cup or potentially an FA Cup. So it is a really tricky situation. I just think that with Thomas Frank, you're getting in a manager who's probably going to bring a bit more stability, who's a bit tactically more flexible as well, obviously, than Ange was as well. So it's such a difficult situation, because as well,
but people talk about tactical flexibility, and they forget all about the flexibility that the manager Postecoglou showed in the final as well. Where everyone expected him to be gung-ho, but he was able to see the game out, manage it out, and he was really smart. And I think, like anybody else, he just needed more players. And I think what is going to determine how Frank does is the players that the club bring in. Given what they've said in the statement, given what is around them as well. We were talking off air, and I don't mind saying what I said then. If you look at Newcastle, you look at Palace, and you look at Spurs, all have surprised people via winning silverware. It'd be interesting to see which of those 3 clubs really pushes on next season, because Spurs do have, in the last 15 years, a form for doing something terrific, but not seizing that moment. 2010, you finished in the Champions League. Did you really push on and get the players? I famously remember being in the press conference when Harry Redknapp was talking about in the January of, I think it was the following season, or 2012, was it? Where he said, we got the opportunity to buy Carlos Tevez and Gary Cahill, who went on to become a warrior for Chelsea. And you ended up buying Ryan Nelson and Louis Saha. And I remember in 2018, when you got to the Champions League final, we were on the way back, and we found out that the club were trying to buy Bruno Fernandes, and the club ended up being browbeaten out of it, not basically paying.
Got the wrong Fernandes, got Gedson.
Exactly, and this is the thing. Here now is a real opportunity, and I hope the club take it, because they've got another chance. If you go out there and if you're saying you're judged on league position, we want to be long-term winning the league. Come on, you cannot compete with the likes of Liverpool, who spend decisively when they got a problem. They spend £70 million on a centre half, £70 million without blinking on Alisson in goal. They go out now and they can go up a level and spend over £100 million on Florian Wirtz. And even when they don't go to those levels, they're really smart about the other, £36 million they spent on Sadio Mane, Mohamed Salah, just over £30 million. That's what Spurs need. Now, I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say you can't still get young talent, source good young talent, and bring that in. But you can't basically say that if you aspire to do what club is saying they're aspiring to doing, then you're going to go out and buy untried talents and see how they get on, and then make the claim to the supporters' trust that you've got to do that because we can't compete on the level of the other clubs. You've got to decide which of the two you want.
Well, I'll tell you what, in this second part, which Joe will come on to, I think the fascinating words that we've heard from Daniel Levy, and whether he was trying to claw them back as soon as he said them, was we want to win the Premier. Well, we need to win the Premier League, We want to win the Champions League. I think for a lot of Spurs supporters that know their football club and know what this club has been about over the last 20, 25 years of ENIC, the reality is that it's going to be very, very hard to do on a wages to revenue ratio when Tottenham, as we know, in the Premier League clubs with the top World 20 revenue, Spurs are only at the moment at a 42% ratio when it comes to that. That if it was going to have to change, adjust or be broken, if the club are going to really be able to fulfill that promise that they have put out there. Because let's be very, very clear on this. You know, this is the club that have said that. It's not the fans. We're not the ones that have put that bar of expectation up now. The club have set that expectation. So it's going to be absolutely fascinating because I know many out there are going to feel maybe at the end of this transfer window, based on what Tottenham do, many may feel they can know very, very quickly about what the expectancy of the club is going to be in the aims. But look, we're going to squeeze in our first break of the show for our listeners on audio. I've got over 5,500 of you that are watching the show live. Thank you ever so much for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. We really appreciate it. I'm joined by my brilliant co-host, Jamie Brown, over at Daily Hotspur. We've got TalkSport's own, Sky Sports' very own, Mirror Sports' very, very own. We love him on this show. We've got the brilliant Darren Lewis returning. Jay, I will steer the show back over to you. Please keep liking. Please keep subscribing. Shout out to a wide range Spurs audience. Jay, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously another appointment that Spurs have made fairly recently was Vinay Venkatesham. Obviously, he came in from Arsenal, which was quite an interesting to see him make that switch. I think he'd been out of work for quite some time, but he gave his first interview. It was quite interesting. He kind of really spoke about building that connection with the supporters. And I mean, to be fair, during our Europa League run, it felt like something kind of changed, especially in those away games. I know during the Frankfurt game, it really felt like a proper Tottenham away end. You know, there were flags in the away ends. Obviously, we saw away at Bodo Glimt. It was, you know, they had the scarves as well. So it sounds like they're trying to build a connection, or Vinay is trying to build this connection with the supporters. Obviously, spoke about how he wants to kind of get to know the supporters better. He's going to continue to speak with the supporters. So, Darren, I don't know how much you know about Vinay Venkatesham and how much this might change Spurs' kind of PR in terms of how they're perceived.
Well, listen, he's a very effective performer. He's got a fantastic reputation. What I would say is that sometimes we can possibly get a little bit too hung up on the musical chairs behind the scenes, because I think what decides the trajectory of a club is the caliber of the players that they bring in, full stop. And if they get somebody that can get those deals over the line, and the willingness of the club to basically loosen the purse strings and match the other clubs for money in terms of wages. So it remains to be seen if he's going to have that kind of influence on Daniel Levy. But my understanding is that Daniel is all powerful. And if you're not on the same page as Don, I've got to stop reading the comments.
That's been my proper 8 years now. Don't worry about it.
If you're not on the same page as the chairman, then you're not there for very long. And I think that's what the situation is. But I think he's going to be effective. I think he is got a fantastic reputation. I was surprised when he came across, I have to say, because, you know, there aren't many administrators that make that short trip down the Seven Sisters Road. No. But then again, if you've got a skill set, you've got a skill set. And the bottom line is that, you know, he's hardly going to have to pull on a pair of boots and run out onto the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium pitch every week, is he?
Depends if we get another injury cross like last season, Dale. We might need him to.
Very true. Very true.
Can I ask you, Dale, on the point you're making here? I mean, listen, as I've said, you've covered Tottenham for many, many, many years. You've seen a lot of people that have worked in and around Daniel Levy. One of the key issues that it's felt with people that have worked around Daniel is the fact that Daniel found it very hard to relinquish any kind of control or power. And when you've seen the recent appointments, the likes of Scott Munn, where, to be honest with you, Scott, we never really got to know the bloke, if I'm going to be honest with you. We never really heard him talk to us, communicate with us on a regular basis. Paratici, who is known as Don Paratici to a lot of the fan base, in the way he's a bit of a wheeler dealer, which I know Harry would not like that claim, wheeler dealer, but he's known for managing, 7 or 8 different transfers at once. We don't hear from these people enough now. I think this is one of the biggest frustrations with Top. We don't hear from these people enough. And I think, can you see that change under Vinay? Because he, as you said, is a bit of an operator known for communication with the fans. And it's all very well now coming out saying when things are at a new era, we want to talk with fans, we want to engage with fans. But we also know when things get tough, that's when you need to hear your leaders. That's when you want to hear your people talking and giving the fans hope, optimism when times are tough.
See, this is the bit where our bromance maybe hits the buffers a little bit. Because, I think as far as we never hear from Damien Vidigali. Do you know who he is? He is the guy who works in tandem with Unai Emery and Monchi at Aston Villa to acquire players.
Okay.
But we never hear from him. We never hear from Michael Edwards at Liverpool. These are guys whose job is to do the job. Go out there, get the players, get the deals over the line, present us with the options to be able to fill a hole in our squad. And I think that's what the job of these guys is to do. I do take your point in terms of the messaging out of the club, but until last season, the club talks a good game on so many occasions. We want to compete with the best. We want to do this. We want to get this player. We want to, and it was all smoke. And so for me, the biggest statement that you could make to the 5,500 people watching this, to all of the people who pay for season tickets, and for all of the people watching around the world who follow Spurs through thick and thin, get the players. Go out there, be decisive, loosen the purse strings on the wages. You put up a couple of graphics there that show just how far the club have to go to really matching the ambition with the expenditure. Because if you can do that, then you've got a chance, and then you don't need people to get the messaging right. The football gets the messaging right. And I think that's going to be the best message you send out. If you go out and you fill those gaps. I know you're going to talk about specific players, and so I'll be able to talk about where those gaps are. You deepen that squad so that if you get injuries next season, you've got the kind of quality that the top clubs do have to be able to take over. I think about Chelsea, right? Chelsea, they need another couple of strikers. When they lost Nicholas Jackson towards the back end of last season, they didn't really have anything, and it looked for all the world as though they might surrender that top 5 place, and they got over the line. But they're going to make sure that doesn't happen again, because they're going to go out and get 2 top-line strikers. That's the kind of thing that Spurs should be doing, rather than having a good first 13, maybe, but then the rest are either kids or fringe players. You can't be doing that. Get those people in, and you don't need people like Vin Takeshim to get the messaging right. You get the messaging right on the pitch.
Can I just say, before Jay comes back in, just to follow on from me on this point, Dal, with Daniel Levy setting that bar as high as he has now by saying again, just to get those words very, very clear, it's not enough. It's what we haven't done that's more important. We need to win the league. We want to win the Premier League. We want to win the Champions League. How much pressure do you think he has put on himself and the club by coming out with that line, in your opinion?
Well, I have to say, right, so I'm going to put my journalist head on here. I was staggered when he said that. I was really, really surprised, because I used an analogy before the show, but I'm not going to use it on air. But I think Spurs are just not in a position to compete with City, Arsenal, Liverpool, potentially Chelsea to win the league. And when I say potentially Chelsea, remember they were 2 points off the lead last December. And when they started asking the manager about it, the manager, instead of basically embracing it and leaning into it and saying, yeah, we could do this, and putting themselves in the conversation, the messaging was all wrong. Oh, we can't do this. I'm not quite sure we're ready, this, that, and the other. And then they fell away. Well, I don't know if Chelsea are going to be having that next season. You're in the Champions League. You've got a trophy. Now you have to be competing for the league. But they've got the squad. They've got the expenditure. And they've got the players. I don't see that to be the case with Spurs, and I'm sure. Listen, if I'm wrong, please tell me in the comments if I'm wrong. But I just don't see that Spurs have got the squad to be talking about winning the league last season, this season, next season. I don't see it. So that really did surprise me. And do you know the person who was put the most under pressure with that statement? Not Frank, Levy. Because, you know, and I'm old enough to be able to say it. You know, he's done superbly well for the club by delivering the training ground and the stadium. But none of that matters unless you've got a winning team. And then you had a winning team, you know, and you could have hedged your bets a little bit and said, you know, yes, we won those things. But as people have been saying on here, you know, the league performance needed to be better. There isn't another club, another top club in Europe that would have accepted that. You could have said that and no one could have really argued with it. But we want to win the league. I mean, come on. Just crazy.
Yeah, just to focus back on Thomas Frank a little bit. He mentioned in his interview about doing his due diligence on the club. Obviously, for him, this is a huge move and potentially even a risky one. Obviously, he's coming from a very stable club at Brentford who do things very well. Obviously, great organisation there. He's spoken so much on so many different interviews about how, you know, his next step would have to be the right move. So obviously for a club that does chop and change managers, and as we've touched on so much throughout this show, obviously a club that, yeah, obviously there is so much chaos going on. Do you think that this is kind of the right fit for Thomas Frank? Obviously, just looking at it from his perspective, as I said, you know, he's coming from a job where he was at a fantastic club like Brentford, really well run, to going to Spurs. So what do you make of it from his perspective?
I think it's a good move for him. It's a step up. He's wanted to leave Brentford for over a year. If you cast your mind back 12 months, he'd done a number of interviews towards the back end of last season where he was talking about his ambitions to manage at a higher level. So I don't think he would have stayed at Brentford beyond this summer. I think what will be the case is that if you're at Brentford, you can get stuffed 4-0 by a club in and around where you are. Nobody bats an eyelid. That won't be the case at Spurs. And I think that's something that he'll have to bear in mind. But then he does have high caliber player. He doesn't have enough of them, but he's good at making the sum of the parts come together to make a good team. And that's why I think he's going to be a good fit. If I remember rightly, Brentford went on a run last season of scoring very early in a number of games.
Yeah. I think within the first minute. Yep.
Against us as well.
Yeah, against us as well. Of course we're in there. I mean, that was right. Of course we're in there.
But I think, you know, I think what's the checklist you go down with Frank? He's a fantastic man manager. He's a terrific organizer. He can improve players. That's one of the key things. You know, he's really good with his coaching. And he's a very pragmatic manager as well. It won't always be sexy, but it will be effective. And I can see him being somebody who, if it's necessary to park the bus, he'll do it. I can see you getting lots of goals from set pieces. I can see you being quite a functional team next season. But if you're going to achieve the objectives, you need the squad. You need the players. Now, and MBEUMO's, if by some miracle you manage to get MBEUMO away from Manchester United, because as I understand it, he still does want to go to Manchester United. But Frank really wants him, and Levy really wants to get him for Frank. If you can get him, then that's a really good start, because you've got goals in that front line, but you've got to start by improving that defence.
Yeah. Again, all very, very fair points. I mean, you talk about there, Dale, the improvement of players, and you look at, you know, he's had a real consistent run through his time at Brentford. I know there was that one season where they finished 16th, but they weren't ever really in any form of like a relegation battle, 16th, 17th. They never really were in trouble. But you look at who he has improved, the likes of, you know, Watkins, Benrahma, Eriksson, Tony, Raya. What was quite fascinating is that all of those players were such key pivotal figures during their time for him at Brentford, and the way that he not only got over losing them, but actually continued to take Brentford on an upward trajectory. So, I mean, how much do you think that would have been intriguing to Daniel Levy and co by the fact that he's got the ability to really, similar to Maurizio in his time, as you know, covering him as well, he had that ability to kind of punch above his weight, really take players to a level where maybe some other managers couldn't get them to. Is that seen as a real kind of pivotal part in his appointment?
It's a really good question, because I think you can add to those names that you just mentioned, Ivan Toney. Everyone thought, what are Brentford going to do without the goals of Ivan Toney? And suddenly we're talking about MBEUMO costing around about £70 million. And MBEUMO scored 20 goals from wide right as well. I think this is what I mean when I talk about Frank being a good coach, good manager, creating a good environment and a good atmosphere at a football club. He's a terrific leader at a football club. He's a superb communicator, gets his message across really well. And these are the reasons why I think there are a number of players that he's going to improve. My understanding is that he tried to get Brennan Johnson before he went to Nottingham Forest. I think it was at Hull at the time. And he was really interested in signing him, but he ended up not getting him because he went to Forest. Now he's got his hands on him. And if Son were to leave, and let's say a set of circumstances, right? Son leaves, and then MBEUMO comes in, for argument's sake. Then you've got MBEUMO right side, Johnson left side, and then you've got Solanke up front. I still think you need another striker. I like Tell, but I think you need more than that up front. Because, you know, again, the teams that do well in the Premier League in terms of punching their weight near the top, they've got a pool of strikers or attacking talent that can get you goals. And that's what you need. But I think as far as Frank is concerned, he ticks a lot of boxes, and I can see why you would be. I think you should be optimistic about your season with him at the club.
Before Jamie asks you about a couple of questions where Frank maybe to some degree is a bit untested, one final thing I want to ask you is, I know you personally interviewed Ivan Toney. I think it was actually during that period of his ban being applied or him coming back to the game. I think one of Tony's things that I've heard him say is the way Frank really supported him both on and off the pitch during that period and never really excluded him at any point. Just how much, Dow, do you think that is a massive part to Frank's game of being a real man manager? Because I know we've heard stories even with Ericsson with the heart attack situation, how he felt so trusted by having Frank as the manager. He's a great people person. I know Daniel Levy described him as a super human being. How much should we not underestimate just what he is as a person, which is why a lot of players, as we've seen, a real outpouring of love from the Brentford community, not only the fans, but the staff around losing the man in that building as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because there's a lot of the interview that you didn't see because we sat for quite a long time. And Tony was telling me exactly as you say, that Frank is a guy who he gets behind players. He doesn't exclude anyone. If you're in the group, you're in the group. And that can extend to the younger players as well. Now, I know younger players are two dirty words on this broadcast. I won't say too much about that. But I think he is somebody that, you know, Ivan was saying that the fact that I feel I can come back at the level I believe I should be at is because of Frank, is because of the confidence that he gives me, because of the family atmosphere, the camaraderie within the players in the squad that he generates, and he turns us into leaders and he makes us believe that we can do it. And people talk about Ivan Toney going to Saudi and basically he gave up and he chased the money. He didn't. He wanted to go to a Premier League club, a top Premier League club, but the Brentford were asking a lot of money from him. You're seeing it now with Semenyo and you're seeing it with MBEUMO. They were asking for a lot of money for a player whose contract was running down. And those clubs were saying, it just doesn't make financial sense to invest that money. But I know for a fact that Tony was waiting. He was hungry to go to a top club and do the business. And when those offers didn't come in, he chose the offer that was on the table for him. That hasn't really hurt him because he's still being called up for England. And the fact that he hasn't played at all actually, I think, reflects badly on Thomas Tuchel rather than on Ivan Toney.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that transition from a manager like Thomas Frank, or from Ange Postecoglou to Thomas Frank, as you said, his people skills seem fantastic. You said the way he dealt with Ivan Toney's been brilliant. Obviously excited as well about his, the way he's developed a lot of the forwards at Brentford as well. I know Ollie Watkins, another one. So that'd be an interesting aspect of Thomas Frank. One area which might be a little bit of a concern is his record in cup competitions. In the last 4 seasons of the FA Cup, he's not made it past the 4th round. In the last 3, he has lost all of those games at home as well. One of those was including against Plymouth, obviously, last season. Now, obviously, people will know that Plymouth did actually manage to knock Premier League champions Liverpool out of the competition. So maybe not a team to be taken too lightly. But that is surely a bit of a concern. Obviously, for Spurs fans, we've all tasted that success now of having won that trophy. It's been so long and we're desperate for it again. But do you think that might be a bit of a concern for Thomas Frank? That cup record is that a factor at all?
No, I don't think so. I think Spurs, even though Spurs do need investment, they're a better squad than Brentford. They're a better side than Brentford. And the fact is that Brentford's objectives in any given season are to get to 40 points. And so very often the teams that would have been stuffed in the early rounds of the FA Cup, I bet they weren't full strength sides. I think as far as Spurs are concerned in the cup competitions, I think the point is that Spurs want to be able to punch their weight in those competitions, but still do the business in the league. That's why you need the deep squad. But I don't think that the club will be having it that you're going out in the early stages of the cup competitions at all. In fact, now that you've got over the line with 1 trophy, I think that's actually going to help the squad to be able to believe that they can do it in the other trophies and actually to think big. So no, that's not a worry for me with Frank. I don't actually have any worries with Frank. Let's not kid ourselves. I just think that I wouldn't have sacked Postecoglou. I would have kept him, but he's gone now. And there's no point now.
No point to know the path.
I just think that Frank is going to be a good manager for you.
Can I ask you just 2 things on Frank, which again, I'm just intrigued to get your take on it, Dal, again, having seen him up close and personal in the Premier League. We know, again, he's not had the greatest record when he first starts at clubs. I think he didn't win any of his first 8 games when he was at Bromby, and then he, I think, lost 8 of his first 10 at Brentford. Now, look, this is at the very, very early stage of his management, but we do know with a club like Tottenham and with a board like Tottenham that we know if he was to have a record like that, that would be a massive, massive problem. We can't get away from it because you know what Tottenham are like. And just in addition to that, the fact he's never managed in a predominant European competition. Yes, he had a few qualifying rounds. You still think that there's, I agree with you. I think there's a lot more upside than there is downside on this. But do you worry for him? Because I have to ask you this, the exposure of a club like Tottenham in comparison to Brentford. I need to tell you this, Dal. You'll know when you go to Hotspur Way next season at those press conferences for Frank, there's going to be double the amount of you guys in there, with all due respect. Double the amount, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, some of the similar questions which Frank is going to have to get used to because that is what it's like on the circuit. He's going to have to hear a lot of the same, not all the same questions, but similar questions being asked week after week. Because as you know it, Dal, as you know, a journalist, and you can explain it if you want, you've got the nationals that go, you've got the people that kind of go on a regular basis that are kind of on the cover of the Tottenham beat. How do you think he is going to cope with the exposure and the difference between managing a club like Brentford to managing a club like Tottenham? You still think he's ready for this? He's waited for this. I think you've also said again, I think he was linked to the Chelsea job, the Man United job. You think he's ready?
Do you know, I'm quite staggered by some of the concerns around him because it's not so much in terms of. I'm not saying my concerns. I'm aware.
You understand? I'm only just asking what you.
Yeah, think. I know, but I am aware that there are lots of Spurs fans that have concerns, that are worried. He hasn't won anything. He hasn't managed at this level. And the reason why I'm staggered by that is because we've seen so many examples of managers who have not managed at this level, who have been number 2s, number 3s, and have been brilliant. Mikel Arteta, right? He was backroom staff. He was his number 2. And he's gone, he's completely reshaped the culture at Arsenal, rebuilt the team, the squad, and has got them 1 or 2 players away from having a title-winning side. I think that you can cut Thomas Frank some slack. He will step up and he'll do a good job and he'll get them working as an effective unit. And I don't have any doubts about that at all. Can he handle the media? Of course he can. He's a superb communicator. Can he improve players? Of course he can. One of the players that you mentioned that did really well was Eriksen. Eriksen at Man United was never the same player as Eriksen when he was at Brentford.
No.
And that kind of goes a little bit under the radar. But he was terrific when he was at Brentford on his comeback. And I think there are a number of players at Spurs that are going to be the better for working with Frank. So regardless of what I might think about his predecessor, about the wage bill, about the fact that there hasn't been a consistent buying policy of bringing in players that are going to suit what the aspirations of the club are, you can't argue with the fact that Frank is a terrific manager and he is going, honestly, I would wager anybody coming back here in a year's time that he'll finish a minimum 6th. Minimum.
Okay.
Minimum. He's not going to struggle.
Yeah. I have. Go on, Jay. Come in for that point.
I was going to say, I mean, it's obviously similar to Ange Postecoglou. I know a lot of people when Ange came in, they were kind of looking at, he'd been 26 years or, across his coaching career and he'd never been near the Premier League. But, sometimes these coaches, they just have, that's just the reality of it. They have to work their way up. And that for me is something that is a really big positive, actually. With Ange, that's something that actually kind of more attracted me to him because so we'd seen the likes of Conte and Mourinho who, kind of felt like they were just doing Spurs a big favour. But with Ange and a manager like Thomas Frank, they're going to be doing everything they possibly can to succeed at Spurs because they've worked so hard to get here. So for me, I only see that as kind of a positive thing. And as obviously, as you said, Darren, as the comments are saying, I do think that, this is just his moment. He's worked all his career to get to this stage. And, he's proved himself at Brentford that he can handle this. And I think his communicating skills are fantastic. I mean, you go and look at a lot of the stuff on YouTube. He seems like a brilliant communicator. I think that's going to get the fans and the media straight on his side. As you mentioned, is his ability to kind of improve players. I think that's something that's going to be really key at Spurs. So, yeah, I think as we mentioned, there are obvious concerns, but on the large part, I think there's so much to be excited about with Thomas Frank. Obviously, one player that he's going to have an interesting conversation with in terms of when everyone returns back from their holidays and for pre-season is Heung-min Son. I mean, my word, what a legend. And I mean, it was amazing to kind of see him lift that trophy. And it's just, it's just obviously he's going to go down in the history of Spurs. It's amazing to kind of see that journey that he's been on, winning that trophy. But of course, he is 32 now. He did have a tricky season personally. He got, still an incredible amount of goals and assists for a player who was supposedly out of form. He has been linked with a move to the likes of Saudi Arabia, obviously the MLS as well. So, Darren, it'd be interesting to kind of get your take on what you think, what your gut feeling what might happen with Sonny this summer, because obviously that's going to be.
I think he's going to go, Jays. I think he's 33 next month, and as you say, he isn't looking like the Son of old. I remember when he arrived at the club from Bayer Leverkusen, and 2013, I think it was. Just a quick story. I remember the first season he was there, he hated England. He was here in England. He hated it. And we found out that he wanted to go home. And, people criticised the chairman, but the chairman persuaded him to stay. Who basically said, look, we'll make it work. He didn't speak English at the time, but he since speaks English a bit better than I do. I mean, I think he is a fantastic player. There have been many occasions where you've played top teams and Harry Kane hadn't been available and he led the line himself and he was absolute quality. And I think on his day, Son Heung-min could play for any team in the Premier League, including Manchester City. He's that good. He quick, composed, got a fantastic eye for a goal. And actually, it's been a little bit sad to see him last season because he's just not the son of old. You can see what he's trying to do, but it's just not there anymore. And I wonder if a move to a league where he's going to get more time, more space is going to be good for him. But I think he's going to go.
Do you think it's a case of Thomas Frank could get the best out of him? I know some supporters maybe question whether Andrew's system might not have suited him. And do you think there's a case that Thomas Frank might be able to get the best out of him? Or is it a case of he's maybe 32 now?
Well, see, your question is interesting because, like I said before, I think if you're a team, a squad that's aspiring to win the league, you want players that can do it. You want players that are on it, and even senior players, but they've still got it. And I just think with Son, it might be the case, right, that he's needed a break, no football, recharge his batteries, come back, and he might be there. But I'm not convinced that's the case. If it was the case that could possibly be, then I'd be firmly behind another season, as you say, maybe seeing if Frank can get the best out of him. But from what I saw last season, I'm not quite so sure that he's the player for the top end of the Premier League anymore.
I said now for me, I would hate people to remember Sonny on a massive, massive decline. And I would
100%.
love him to personally go out on top. And I think by the fact as we know, he's been here for over 10 years. He is a legend of the football club. He's got that trophy. I don't think there's a better time for him to go out on this high and be remembered for winning that trophy. Because I would hate for the memory to be that next season we see an even further rapid decline in Son, which again, maybe Jamie has got a point, with Frank, maybe that wouldn't happen, but we just don't know. And I think it'd be a real shame if Son is remembered for some of the parts we saw him last season and not the Sonny that is holding that trophy aloft, that all you have is great memories at the parade when he took the mic. So it's going to be fascinating. Look, we're going to squeeze in our final break of the show for our listeners on audio. We're going from the captain to the vice captain. God help us. Listen, we have got nearly over 7,000 of you that are watching the show live. Thank you so much for all your incredible support for Last One on Spurs. Like I say, please keep liking. Please keep subscribing. We're joined by the brilliant Jamie Brown at the Daily Hotspur. And we're joined by one of our favourite, always returning journalists to Last One on Spurs. Because there's so much of his time. Look, many know we only get up to catch up with this man twice in the season. We get him in January. We get him in the summer. And in typical Tottenham fashion, something has always changed. We're either changing a manager or we're looking to change.
That's so true. There is always drama. I actually think that every time you ask me to come on, there are dark clouds over North London, where I live.
I remember, Dal, you're always pleading when you come on here. Your one word is patient. Be patient. We've got the patience of the trophy off the back now. It'd just be nice to see a club that, if they can at some point go beyond the 2-season mark with a manager, of course, if he's the right man for the club, and we shall see if Frank is that man.
I said 6th place, right? What do you guys think? 6th place or higher?
I think
in terms of finish next season.
Go on, Jay. You can go first if you want.
That's really tricky. It's such a big leap, isn't it? We're having to go from 17th, aren't we?
Exactly what I said. Yep.
I do think you're right, though, Darren. I think you did say it earlier. I think this squad is a lot better. Well, obviously, it's a lot better than 17th. It's a lot better than should be in the bottom half. But so I think that this squad can make a pretty drastic turnaround. So I think you're right. 5th or 6th, I think's about right. But as I said, it's interesting with those cup competitions now because, as I said, silverware. We've realised that now that that's what we all want. That's what we all want. That's what they play football for. So obviously we want to be doing well in those cup competitions. But I think 5th or 6th is probably about where I put us as well.
I think it's going to be very hard. And I know people are going to throw at me the Forest analogy with the fact they jumped from 17th to 6th, and you've got the Leicester philosophy where they went from 17th to winning the title. But we have to remember that was a season of transition, right, for a lot of clubs. I think it's very, very hard, as Jay touched upon there, to go from 17th to straight back into the top 4, the top 5. And I said it on Sky recently, and I think it's fair to say something like what I said. I said if Tottenham would have finished in the top 10 and win a Carabao Cup in Thomas Frank's first season, I think that'd be a great first season. If we could go on and win another trophy, finish in the top 10, they would be serial winners. You keep that winning feeling around the club. You'd have a manager that's ready to build for the next season. But I think the problem is now, as we've seen, everyone's expectations are a bit different now. Some would feel if we don't win a cup, is it a successful season and finish sixth? Does that justify that? I can see all fan side angles, but I mean, we have to remember we were 17th in the league. We had 22 defeats. Yes, I understand we wouldn't have had many as defeats if there was more jeopardy around a relegation battle, which, to be fair, we weren't in. But I think it's been very, very hard to make that jump from 17th to maybe the top four. So we shall see. One player that we're unsure, Dow, is going to continue being part of the Spurs journey is, of course, vice captain Christian Romero, who, to be fair to him, whenever he talks or posts, generally it's quite explosive. It's hard hitting. It makes a difference. And it took Christian Romero 56 minutes after the appointment of Thomas Frank to have his say on wishing Ange Postecoglou well. And a line that, of course, sticks out from that statement is that from day one, you paved the way despite the many obstacles that always existed and always will exist. And that's not the first time, depending on how you want to interpret that or you want to label that, where it could be a dig at the hierarchy. He's questioned the ambition of the football club on more than one occasion. I'm intrigued to know how you take those words from Romero and what you feel the future does hold for Christian when there's this reported interest from Atletico Madrid and you're hearing reports that Diego Simeone is calling him on the daily, if you can believe it. So I'll hand over to you now.
All right, so this is the bit where all your 7,000 Spurs fans are going to hit me over the head. I'm not a Romero fan. I think he's a good player. Without doubt, he's a good player, but he's very often a liability. I don't mind players who play on the edge. I don't mind players, Dele Alli played on the edge. But he delivered, and I could see what he was trying to do and how he was going about his business. I look at Romero for such a high achieving player. It's interesting. He talked about the obstacles that faced Postecoglou. He was one of them. In 3 of the 4 seasons that he's been at Spurs, he's had red cards. One of the seasons he had 2. There were so many moments in games with Romero where he'd get himself involved in stuff that was just needless, brainless, and ultimately harmed the team. And personally, if you could get a good amount of money for him, I would take it. As I say, I'm not a fan, but I just think that, and I think because he wants to go to Atletico and he's agitating for that move, I'm not so sure that he's going to be productive under Thomas Frank. We've seen a million times where you can have a low maintenance manager like a Frank, but then you can get quite a volatile character like a Romero who is going to create the conditions to go to wherever he needs to go. Rather than have that drama, I'd let him go.
Can I just say one thing? And I don't know if Jane wants to come in as well. I would say that his disciplinary record for me improved over this last season. I think the problem I have with Romero is that his lack of availability to me is a massive, massive problem. I think when you look at the games he's been involved in for Tottenham over the course of this season alone, he's only been around for a third of the season. And it feels whenever we are approaching or near an international break, or dare I say, Jay, you may have qualified me on this as well, any kind of qualifier, he's never really around. I mean, even the last game of the season, nobody knew where he is. I think the thing I would say is that Romero, for me, won us that final. I think the way his attitude was, he kind of led us into the circle where United players were at that point for the huddle. The way he, in my opinion, completely rattled Harry Maguire on the final was a massive, massive point that I see that when it comes to the big stage, when it comes to winning games on the big stage, he can get us over the line. But my biggest problem is, I don't know whether Jay, you want to come in as well, is that it's his availability that is my biggest worry, and whether we can keep him fit.
So last season he missed 27 matches because of injury. Obviously, that is a concern. I don't think it's been quite as bad the previous season, just from what I'm looking at. So, yeah, I mean, you're right. That's obviously a big concern for him. And then, of course, when his partner is a guy like Mickey van der Ven, when he's got hamstrings that yeah, obviously having had the best of fortune, especially the last 2 seasons, that's obviously a concern. And you know, sometimes one of the best abilities you can have is just being able to stay fit, and that's something, unfortunately, that Romero has proved that he has struggled with. But you're right, in that final, I think he was the guy that won it for us. His passion. That's the thing. I think, and Darren's right. You know, where he does play on the edge, and I think when he played on the edge in the final, that was brilliant because he channeled that in the right way. But there's too many times where he maybe doesn't channel it quite in the right way, and as Darren said, he has cost us. But look, for me, my honest opinion on Romero is, he is a world-class defender. I still believe that he is one of the best in the world. It's just whether Thomas Frank can kind of get him to, again, channel that on a more regular basis to play in the right way. I mean, Dele Alli was the same, and obviously there's a great point from Darren about Dele playing on the edge, and that's what made him such a great player. And so often he was able to use that in the right way. Maybe with Romero, we just don't see that enough. So if Thomas Frank can get the best out of Romero, you've got top 5 central defenders in the world. But as Darren also says, that there is obviously that worry about his disciplinary record.
Just a final thing on Romero, Dow. I mean, we know Thomas Frank has got this term that he uses, this kind of no dickheads policy is his term, right? And I'm not sitting here claiming that Romero is a problem behind the scenes. I'm not in training. I can't claim to know this, and I can't speculate this. But I just wonder, can you see a situation there where this is going to really test Frank in his early period at Tottenham with regards to trying to establish a camaraderie with the players? If you've got this situation where the player wants to go and there's an argument between trying to keep him, letting him go, do you think it might be best for all parties, especially with Thomas Frank in his first season at the club and trying to set the right tone? Would you worry that by not letting him go, that could also create some problems behind the scenes, potentially?
I think Romero wants to go. Yeah, and the reason why Romero's said what he has said is because he is, as you know, we've seen it before, players try to force their way out of clubs, and you create a flashpoint which suggests that your position's untenable. I've got no doubt that Frank would have had a conversation with him and set out his own particular stall and said, look, give me a year. If you still want to go with my blessing, etc., etc. But I think, to reiterate, I think Romero is a terrific player, but he does have that hair trigger that costs you. And one of the things, if you're going to, Spurs 2.0 are going to build on the success of last season, one of the things you have to get right from the jump is your defense. You need that in your defense. And like I said, I don't mind if you've got a calm, quick, left-sided centre-half like a Van der Ven, and then you've got somebody who can play on the edge on the right side. But you can't keep having the kind of flashpoints that he keeps getting himself into. Now, listen, Atletico Madrid, we know the way that they play. We know the way that Simeone likes to play. He could be a terrific fit for them.
Yep.
And, I wouldn't take anything less than £80 million from him. He's a terrific player. But, last season, right, back end of last season, last 7 games, he picks up 4 yellow cards. Key games, crucial games. 3 yellow cards, I should say, in the last 6 games. And I've got no doubt that Frank would want to try to see if he could turn him around, but I think his head's already out the door, and I think you're probably already looking at a replacement for him.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that would be really disappointing if we were to have to let a player like Romero go. As I said, I think he's a superb player, and hopefully Frank can convince him. As you said, maybe he has had that conversation with him. But one player he might have had a conversation with, I know you reported it yourself as well, about Bryan Mbeumo. Obviously, a player who, as we've mentioned, obviously he's one of the many players that Thomas Frank has helped have fantastic. Obviously career so far. Obviously still a young player, 25, scored 20 Premier League goals last season, a really impressive achievement. A player of interest to Spurs. I mean, obviously we know as well there's the likes of Mikkel Damsgaard who did really well at Brentford. I think obviously multiple other players. I don't know whether Bryan Mbeumo, obviously we know the interest in Manchester United. Do we think that Spurs might have any chance of getting MBEUMO, and maybe are there other Brentford players that Spurs might look at?
My understanding is the one Brentford player that MBEUMO that Frank wants is MBEUMO. And at this point, I do just want to reiterate the way I'm sure you guys all know, but I see it a lot. As you know, I work in the other section of the newspaper, but I like my transfers, and I still see it now where people go out to kind of tell fans what the picture looks like. X club is interested in Y player, and there are lots of people who interpret that as Y player is going to go definitely to X club, and that's not the case. Yeah. All we can do as reporters is tell you who clubs are interested in. And my understanding is, as panned out, that Frank really wants MBEUMO. Spurs have put the money down to Brentford to say, look, we want to get him. And Brentford and Frank is trying to persuade MBEUMO to come to Spurs. But MBEUMO, he doesn't care about what happened to United last season. He doesn't care about the fact that they're not in the Champions League. He simply wants to go to Manchester United. So what Frank has been trying to do is use the relationship that they'd had when they were at Brentford together and say, listen, we can take it to another level. We can play Champions League football. We can punch our weight at the top of the league. These are my plans. These are the players I want to bring in. And it really does remain to be seen what way it's going to go. But I still think United have got the edge, even though they haven't yet paid the money that Brentford want. And the fact that Brentford know that they can get that money from Spurs means that they can continue to drive a hard bargain with Manchester United. I think Man United wanted to make Cunha their marquee signing. They didn't really want to pay more for anyone else than Cunha because he was their guy. But given that they want MBEUMO and he wants to come to them, I think they might now have to pay a little bit over the odds if they want to get him.
Do you think the wages might is that going to be an issue for Spurs? Because obviously I know maybe reported just in terms of the wages. I know obviously reported elsewhere. Is that going to be an issue? For Spurs?
Right. Look, yes and no. Because when I heard about that, I kind of asked that question myself. And what I got told was that Spurs could put together a financial package that isn't far away from where Man United are. But Man United could get to where they want to be on financials effortlessly. And I suppose that's the difference between the two clubs. Man United could do what MBEUMO wants without even blinking, whereas Spurs would have to do a few things, a few incentives, a few add-ons, pull a few levers to get there. But they could get there. They could get there, or they could get in the ballpark, should we say? But I think United would always have the edge in terms of wages. It's just in terms of what Brentford would get out the deal. That's a big sticking point.
I don't know what you think there. I've been curious to get your opinion on it. They've also been linked Spurs to the likes of Visser, Collins, Damsgaard. I mean, you're shaking your head there just to be clear for listeners on audio. But do you know of too many occasions? I think someone actually mentioned it to me when Harry went back and got Crouchy from Pompey to Tottenham. Is there many occasions you can think of where not only does the manager walk out of the club, but take the best player with them to the club they're joining? Does that play any kind of picture for Brentford and why they may not want to sell to Tottenham? Or do you just think it will be based on the financials and maybe argue where the player wants to go? How do you see that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any politics in Brentford not wanting to sell to Tottenham. None of that. I don't think that is a factor in it at all. I think Brentford just want to do a deal and they want to get the best deal they can for them out of the player that they're selling. I mean, he's had a super season.
Yeah.
They've done all the hard work to getting him to the level he's at now, and they want that expenditure for him. And they're helped by the fact that he's got an option for another year as well. So, yeah, and they could easily go to Spurs and basically have such an impact that some people think that the £70 million is a bargain. But I think from what I gather, it's 65, 70 million pounds that they want for him. And I think given that there's a market for him, there's every chance that they're going to get that.
Do you have a gut feeling down how this one will work out, or is it just simply too close to call?
I think it's still too close to call because United have the edge, but Spurs are prepared to pay the money. I think, the chairman wants to deliver a statement signing for them. And this is what I'm saying about, sometimes he gets a lot of stick and, he's a big boy. He could take it. But I know that he's really trying hard. And if MBEUMO does go to United, it will not be because Spurs haven't tried incredibly hard to take him.
Okay. I mean, another name that has been linked, another forward option that we've seen reports suggest, I think from David Ornstein, maybe a colleague of yours, that you can tell us that Tottenham reportedly have made some form of an inquiry for Antoine Semenyo, but at present Tottenham are reportedly not proceeding with a move for the Ghanaian forward. We understand he's thought to have attracted a lot of attention through a lot of high-profile Premier League clubs. There's this reported 70 million valuation on the player. We know he's become an integral part of Andoni Iraola's Bournemouth side. He scored 21 goals across the last 2 seasons, including 13 in 42 in all comps in the 24-25 season. It just feels like a typical Tottenham question I'm going to ask you, Dow. I mean, can you realistically see Spurs paying that asking price, which would be once again smashing their club record fee of what they paid for Dominic Solanke, which I think was around the 65 million pound mark?
I don't think they'll go in at that level, but I do know that they are very, very interested in him. And they like him as a player. They like his versatility. They like the fact that he's still got more improvement left in him. He's very low maintenance, and they want to see if they can do a deal for him. But again, as is their right, Bournemouth are demanding big money for him, so they can get as much money as they can for their manager to reinvest in the team. Their manager hasn't committed to a new contract yet. They want him to sign a new contract, but he won't do it. And I would imagine they're trying to see if they can really get him a big war chest to be able to work with. And that might be having an impact on this particular situation. But Spurs do have a very strong interest in Antoine Semenyo. They like him as a player. They like his skill set. And what I can't see is them paying MBEUMO money for him. I can't see that happening, but I can see him, if they can do the deal, I can see him at Spurs next season.
Okay.
I guess the other thing with Bournemouth as well is, they've already been raided for some of their top players. Obviously, Dean Huijsen's gone to Real Madrid for £50 million. Zabani as well, their other central defender, has been linked with a £50 million move to Paris Saint-Germain. There was another one as well.
Kirkes, forgive me.
Sorry, that's the one. Of course it is. Kirkes going to Liverpool for £40 million. So they've really raised so much money, so they're not going to be in a position to need to sell any more players. So obviously, as we mentioned,
you say that. I mean, they've already brought in another left back, as I understand it. They've replaced Kirkes already.
Yep.
And I think they've brought another centre half as well. But I mean, you do make a good point. They've sold 3 of their back 4. You're absolutely right. And so they won't want to rip up too much more of the side. But if you look at it from the flip side, they've made nearly £200 million, or rather would be pushing £200 million if they were to sign, let Semenyo go for the kind of money that they're talking about. Again, I can't see Semenyo. If he does go for that kind of money, it will not be to Spurs. But I will offer you this. The team that I think, if Man United sign MBEUMO, Spurs will go full steam ahead for Semenyo, and vice versa.
Oh, interesting.
So it's just, I mean, just to be clear, Dow, from your understanding, it'll be either one or the other. Definitely not both.
Definitely not both. Definitely not both. But it'll be one or the other.
Do you think that a right-sided player is what Spurs really need? Because obviously at the moment, probably our starter next season in that right-hand position is going to be Brennan Johnson, who obviously is an absolute club legend now, scoring that goal. But do you think that that's what we really need next season, a right-sided?
Well, Jay, I think Johnson could play on the other side.
Yeah.
If need be. So I don't think that would be. And as I said, I don't think Son's a starter in the Tottenham team next year. Even a fit Son, I don't see him as being a starter next season. I see him as coming off the bench, and I think that possibly will be the deciding factor in whether he stays or not. He's a legend. He's got that seniority at the club, and he's everybody who don't love Son. But
of course.
So that was grammatically incorrect, given my position. I do apologise for that. But I think as far as the Son is concerned, he wouldn't be starting matches, whereas Johnson would, and that should be the case.
Now, obviously, no pressure here, Darren, because I'm going to be honest. This is one of my dream signings. So if you do crush,
and also, got to say, Dan, before you come on this point, Jamie, I think this has been the one player we leave to the end of every time that Darren has been on last one on Spurs in the last 3 years. So everybody knows who it's going to be. Go on,
sure, Ricky, I'm sure you just said the same script over from the last 3 years. I think that's what
it's the same wording. It's the same wording. It never changes. It never changes.
But yeah, of course, as you can see, this man on screen, a guy who I've wanted for a very long time, one of my dream signings, EZE, obviously just had an incredible season at Crystal Palace. I think he got 16 goals in total. I think it was 11 assists as well. Obviously, as I mentioned, he's a guy who's long been on Spurs' radar since I think it was 2019 when he was playing for QPR. Now, obviously, he's got a reported release clause of £60 million. I think there's £8 million or so in terms of add-ons as well on that. There has been some reports as well that maybe Palace would be open to taking that in instalments if a club was potentially play a little bit over, or however that works as well. Is this a player that could potentially end up at the Spurs?
I know that he's got big fans at Manchester City, so again, we were talking about wages, etc., etc. I think once that level of club comes in, then it's all over. I'm not saying he's going to go there, but I can see him having other options that would be more attractive to him. Listen, Spurs are a great club, great manager. I've been raving about it for the last 2 hours, and big ambitions as well. But there are other clubs that are already there. For example, Bayern Munich came from the clouds for EZE last year. And once they put that offer down for him, it was a no-brainer. And I think that there is a high caliber of club that's going to come in for EZE. And added to that, I think EZE will cost that. I think what they will look to do is, I've got to be really careful about how I say this. EZE is a very low maintenance player. He's such a good guy. Everybody knows his story, the adversity that he's had, and what he's come through. And he now wants to be in a situation where he continues to make progress, but he plays wherever he goes. He plays. He starts. He improves. He gets into a settled side that's going to enable him to perform at his best level. The interesting thing about City is that obviously Jack Grealish is surplus to requirements, but they need a Grealish type player, and that for me would put EZE in the frame for City over Spurs. So we'll keep an eye on that one, see how it goes.
We've been speaking a lot.
See, I'm hedging my bets there.
I mean, look, we've been speaking a lot in the last hour and a half, though. The fact that the club have come out and said they want to win the Premier League and want to win the Champions League. It's clearly evident, I think, to a lot of Spurs fans out there this summer, that I don't know if you agree, Joe, on this point, that we are expecting, I would think now, a couple of high-profile, experienced players that have been there in the Premier League. Maybe not won the Premier League, but have certainly been in and around the league itself. The last couple of windows, Dow, to be fair, there's been a real high emphasis on bringing in young talent. Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall, these kind of players that are certainly going to, in the next couple of years, and as we're seeing now, really flourish. But how much do you think this window is about for Tottenham buying ready-made players that are actually going to go into Thomas Frank's first team and not players that are just to supplement the squad? How important do you think that is going to be for Thomas this summer?
I think it's crucial. I think, I mean, you've made the point. We've got people on the comments making the point, and you're all absolutely right. You are not competing for the league if you don't have that core of experience, that core of consistency, the quality, and there are areas in that Spurs team and in that Spurs squad where it's just not there. So this is going to be a crucial window. This window cannot close with you bringing in another 3 or 4 players. I mean, I think it's almost characterized the last 20 years as far as Spurs are concerned. I remember you brought in a guy called George Kevin Nkudu. The guy was so raw, he was in the butchers. It was ridiculous. And I just think that you've got to get to a stage where you are very similar to some of the other. I give you some examples in terms of your the teams you're up against and the clubs you're up against. Arsenal, the talk has been, it hasn't yet been substantiated, but the talk has been that there's a potential for Rodrigo at Real Madrid. Rodrigo, for goodness sake. Liverpool are talking about having a little tickle at Alexander Isak. Chelsea have been linked forever with Victor Osimhen. I mean, these are the hardcore players that you're talking about, who, if they come in, you know that you're going to get the quality and the consistency. And I think what Spurs need in this window is to make a real statement in terms of
agree. Yeah.
Experience, quality, consistency, and leadership as well. Because all too often last season, and it ended up superbly well, but there was chaos in key moments last season. And that's not what you want. Now, there will be a pragmatism about the way you play and the way that you're set up and the way that you go about your business under Frank, but you've got to supplement that with quality. And if you don't have that, as I said before, it won't be Frank so much that will be under pressure. It'll be the chairman again. Maybe unjustifiably so, because he's done well to get Frank to the club, and he's done, everybody knows what he's done with the training ground and the stadium, etc., etc., etc. But you cannot come out and say we've sacked the manager because we aspire to punch our weight with the top teams in the Premier League, and then don't give him the tools and kind of vindicate Conte, Mourinho, Pochettino, all the managers who basically said they got big ambitions, but they don't give us the players to be able to try and achieve them.
It's going to be fascinating. I mean, before we close it down, Jay, just to bring you on that point, are you at any point concerned at this point, Jamie? You know, there's links to the fact we do know we've also got this homegrown issue at the moment with the squad where it's almost a case of 1 in, 1 out. I know they've been linked with a move for Kyle Walker-Peters. You know, that's been one they've mentioned on the radar to try and get around this issue they do face with the homegrown situation. I mean, are you concerned at the moment, Jay? I have to say, it's still, and we're, again, I know, I was about to say we're late June. I mean, we look around the corner, we're back in pre-season again. I mean, are you worried, Jay?
I mean, I'm only worried, not because of the timing. I think that obviously you look at a lot of the clubs, I think, you know, Arsenal, I mean, only really Liverpool, Manchester City have done significant business. So I think at the moment, we're probably okay where we're at. That's not a worry for me. It's just the fact that, you know, we've been here so many times with Daniel Levy where he talks such a good game, but now he's got to go and deliver it. For me, his words didn't mean anything to me in terms of what he said about winning the league. I think Darren said it earlier, you know, it was such a surprise to hear him say that because the only person he's put pressure on is himself. He's got to go and deliver that now. And he's I mean, obviously, maybe he's not gone that strong previously in the past, but he's always spoke about having this ambition. But, you know, we've never really seen it. I mean, obviously, Semenyo, you know, he's a player that clearly we like. And as Darren said, he's someone that we might go for if we don't get an MBEUMO. Well, look, obviously, if that's the asking price for him, then you've got to go and pay it sometimes. You can't kind of just did around with these, you know, your top targets. So at the end of the day, they've got to go and show that ambition. And yeah, for me, I'm not too concerned, as I said, about the timing of everything at the moment. It's more, you know, we've been here so many times and we've been let down. But I think it's such a big point as well. And now again, Darren mentioned it earlier. It's a massive springboard this for Spurs. I mean, Obviously at the time, I didn't think too much of it in terms of what could come from winning the Europa League. It was just about getting that trophy. But Champions League football, it's Champions League money. Obviously, it makes us so much more attractive to bring in players, and it is a massive springboard. But it's just not something that I feel like we're going to capitalise on, just because we've seen it too many times where we just don't do it.
Can I ask you on this point, Dal, to come back round to you? The first signing of the Thomas Frank era has been rubber stamped as being Matisse Tell. The second signing is a 5 million youngster from Japan who, look, by all means could be a very, very good player for the football club. But Dal, whenever you've come on here, I know the messages you get after you come on last week on Spurs from Spurs fans. You've become a sympathiser for us, a therapist for us, when you've been on here. But there will be that growing feeling that, with all due respect, when you're signing the likes of these kind of players, and Tell will hopefully go on to be a fine player for Tottenham, but there will be that growing expectancy now. Okay, but we need to sign someone proven, and that is only going to start ramping up through the summer until a player of that type of caliber does come in. We've discussed there for a second. We know they've got these issues around the homegrown quota as well, which is a big issue, I think, for not just Tottenham, but quite a number of clubs. It's really important they get this right, isn't it, this summer? I know Jamie has expressed his concerns about being a Spurs fan over many years under ENIC, but there's only so long you can continue to actually... for me, I've made my position clear on the board. I don't think the current ownership is, in my opinion, right under its structure to take us forward. I would be in favour of some form of a change, and we'll see how that does work out. But there's only so long you can keep with the same rhetoric, and as you said earlier, not give the managers, the players, the tools they need to try and take the club forward, right?
Yeah, listen, the club, with the spotlight will be on the club, just as the spotlight was on Postecoglou. The moment he said, "I always win something in my second season," suddenly there was a jeopardy, there was a narrative around him, and every time Spurs go through a bad patch, those words will come back to haunt the chairman, because they were a gift, really, for the media that didn't really expect him to come out with anything like that. To be honest with you, the numbers were there to support him, saying we sacked him because of the league performance. And you could have just stayed in that ballpark and nobody would have been any the wiser. I think as far as what he said is concerned, it means that at the end of this summer transfer window, the club's aspirations will be measured against who they've bought. And if the players that they've bought aren't in that ballpark, that's what the assessment will be. How can you talk about wanting to compete with the top teams? Arsenal only need 2 strikers, and suddenly they've got depth in their squad to die for. Liverpool have just bought one of the best players in the world in Wirtz, and they've replaced Alexander-Arnold with Frimpong. Chelsea need 1, maybe 2 strikers, and they're back in business again. Maybe a bit of experience at centre-half as well, and another goalkeeper. And Aston Villa will be strong again. Unai Emery is a past master at being able to get the right players. And Newcastle talking about getting Rashford to play off the left for them if they were to lose Anthony Gordon. I mean, these are clubs that know that you've got to go out there and spend the money, spend the wages, bring the quality in if you're going to have these aspirations. And that's what you guys have got to do. But I'm just not sure of... I don't know. It's been such a continuing narrative for 20 years. I don't know when it changes. I don't know what for you to change it. There has to be such a big sea change, like there was at Arsenal, like there was at Liverpool, and you're a better person to answer whether or not that's possible than I am.
I just think it'll come down to injection of cash, won't it, Jared? If you agree, it's going to come down to if it's possible some form of investment. I see that's the only way of that landscape changing. Jared, if you agree, if you want to come in on that final point there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's going to be a manager that's ultimately going to come in and change that. I think Ange did a good job. Obviously, Pochettino did a pretty good job in trying to change the culture. But ultimately, we saw Pochettino came up short because he, in that last season after the Champions League, he wasn't able to get the players in that he wanted or wasn't backed well enough. Postecoglou, we saw last summer, he got 5 teenagers signed and 1 senior player signed. So yeah, I mean that's ultimately kind of where it's at. And as you said, I think it is about that investment. It's about the people at the top. And we've been here for my entire lifetime. I think it's been 25 years or 24 years that Daniel Levy's been in charge of the club. So I've not known anything different. And yeah, he's not going to change anytime soon, is he, Daniel Levy? So no, I don't think there's going to be a manager who's going to come in and be able to change it. So best of luck, Thomas Frank. Also, Darren, it'd be interesting to just get your take on kind of maybe the expectations for this season, because as you mentioned there, you list through all those clubs, and I totally agree in terms of, you know, even like the Aston Villas, the Newcastles, then of course the top clubs, the Chelseas, Man City, Liverpool, Arsenal. I mean, it'd be interesting to get your take on kind of what might be the expectations for Thomas Frank, just obviously from maybe an outsider looking in. What kind of would you expect from Spurs this season? What do you think the expectations should be?
Well, given that they've sacked Postecoglou because of the league position, I expect them to be much more competitive in the league, and to be staying in and around the top 5, 6th positions, assuming it's quite tight. I think if they're quite far off it very early on, the pressure will start to build among you guys, actually, because, you know, it will come back to haunt them, and you guys won't be happy. But I think by the end of this season, the expectation for Frank will be a Champions League place. That's the expectation for every manager, and has been for the last 20 years, you know, because once Harry Redknapp showed it could be done in, what was it, 2011, 2010? Suddenly it could be done. And suddenly it meant that, you know, if you were taking the challenge of managing Tottenham Hotspur, then that's where they wanted you to be. Nobody wants to be in the Europa League. Everybody wants to be in the Champions League. That's where the money is. That's where the players are. That's where the capacity to attract a high caliber players is. So that will be the brief for him. But also he will be expected to win a trophy again, because Postecoglou's shown it can be done. And if he doesn't, but you finish 6th and it's an underwhelming season, that is going to be used as a stick to beat the manager, but beat the chairman with. So it's going to be a little bit. It's going to be interesting to see where they are. For my money, I have to say, I think if there is an improvement in the way that the team plays and a consistency in the league, I wouldn't hit Thomas Frank over the head too much. I say again, I've been saying it all the way through, I think he's a terrific manager, but I do know you guys keep making reference to the platforms that I work on. So I've heard enough fans talking about the fact that, you know, we want to win things, B, we want to be in the Champions League, and B, we want the quality players to be able to punch our weight with the other teams in the Premier League. And all of this is really curious, because if you look down the road at Arsenal, they won nothing last season. Yeah. Whereas you won stuff, and your manager's gone and their manager's still there. It's fascinating.
Dal, it's fascinating always having you on the show. I know a lot of people always stop me and ask me, when is Darren Lewis coming back onto Last Word on Spurs? And I say, we only get him twice a year. We only get him twice a season. And after that, he's all Tottenham'd out. Tottenham's enough for him twice a season on here. He's always been our residential therapist. Dal, look, I mentioned it earlier. We love hearing your dulcet tones. I think you're always... I know, look, again, you're a man that remains impartial, but I think you've always been fair, balanced when it comes to Tottenham. And as Terry says here, Darren is a class act. I can listen to him talk football for hours.
Thanks,
Great
Tel.
show, Ricky. So many nice comments I've got to say for you, Dal. Look, I mentioned it earlier. We hear your dulcet tones on Sky, on TalkSport, of course, written press as well. Dal, where can everybody find the wonderful work you do for not just the Spurs community, but the footballing community? Where can everybody find you?
Well, funnily enough, I'm very likely to be back on TalkSport next Sunday morning, especially if the England under-21s make it into the final of that tournament, which I've got every chance of doing. So hopefully I'll see one or two of you there.
Dal, you're a star. Listen, we look forward to catching up with you in January. We are riding high under the Great Dane Thomas Frank, and hopefully in Daniel Levy's words, gunning for a title. Even I can't believe what I'm saying.
I'm praying that by the time I come back on next January, you're in the top 4. Otherwise, there'll be problems.
I tell you what, when is it never problems when you come on here? Not that it's your fault at all. I'm sure, listen, under Frank will be okay. Jay, thank you so much. I'm sure you agree. Amazing show, right? Brilliant to get Darren on here. Always top bloke. And I know a lot of people love his knowledge on football. Brilliant, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just need to see the comments and all the love for Darren. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, totally echo it. And yeah, obviously, an absolute pleasure to share the evening with him. And great to hear his take on Spurs. So, yeah, really great show.
Now, we're all looking forward to January. We'll count the days down. You might be dreading them, but we're looking forward to it. From the wonderful Jamie Brown from the Daily Hotspur, for the superb Darren Lewis. Amazing journalists out there. Guys, please keep liking. Please keep subscribing. We'll be back with you soon as Tottenham are closing in on their second signing of the summer. From me, from Jamie, from Darren. We've been the last one of Spurs. Thank you so much. Keep safe, keep well. And as always, come